Yo, welcome. Today, we'll be talking about the proof for the Torah's truth of being from the Creator of the universe. As you can see, there's a letter here from the year 5714 from the creation of the universe. That is about 67 years ago to the day in the Hebrew calendar, because today is also the 18th of Tammuz. So after all this time, it's shocking that more people don't know about the proof, the Torah's truth. So let's go through this word by word and see if we can figure it out. 18th of Tammuz, 5714, about 67 years ago from this year, which is 5781 from the creation of the universe. From Brooklyn. Shalom ubracha, which means peace and blessings. This is the Rebbe writing a letter to someone. It doesn't say what the original letter the person wrote to him was, but this is the response. It says, just get this out of the way. It says basically, okay, let's see what it says. It says, I have received your letter of June 13th, which was a few days ago, plus 67 years, etc., in which, after a brief biographical outline of yourself, you present your problem, namely, that you recently became aware of a feeling of apathy and indifference to the religious rites and practices due to a perplexing doubt as to the authenticity of the Jewish tradition, by which you undoubtedly mean the Torah and mitzvos. As you can see, his definition for mitzvahs, the commandments. And you wonder how their authenticity may logically be proved. I hope this is indeed the only difficulty which has weakened your observance of the practical precepts in daily life. In most cases, the true reason is the desire to make it easy for oneself and avoid a burden. One later seeks to justify this attitude on philosophical grounds. Apparently, this is common, unfortunately, amongst many people. So, first of all, it's saying, if it's a logical proof, then we'll get to the logic soon. But if the problem is beyond logic, if it's someone's personal emotional feelings, then it's a deeper issue, which is it's about to say, if this is the case, the problem is more complicated. In the hope that you belong to the minority who actually believe in logic, I will briefly state here the logical basis of the truth that the Torah and the mitzvahs were given to us, Jews, by divine revelation. This is not very difficult to prove, since the proof is the same as all other evidence that we have of historic events in past generations, only much more forcefully and convincingly. It stresses here that the proof is more than other historic events, because historic events can only be proven to a certain extent, because they're things that happened in the past that can't be repeated. But the same evidence that's used for other historic events is the same as the evidence that exists for the Torah's truth, only the Torah is much more. If you are, by way of illustration, if you are asked, how do you know that there existed such a person as Maimonides, which is the Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, as you can see, which was someone who lived around 800 years ago, approximately, give or take a few seconds, whom you mention in your letter, which this is the person writing the letter to the Rebbe mentioned the Rambam, which we'll see is actually pretty big divine providence that he happened to mention that. But anyway, so we're talking as an example to prove the Torah's truth, we're proving the truth of the Rambam, who was a person who existed much later. But this is an example. So in your letter, you would surely reply that you are certain about his existence from the books he has written. He wasn't that long ago, first of all. Rambam was only 800. Although Rambam, Maimonides, lived some 800 years ago, his works now in print have been reprinted from earlier editions, and those from earlier ones still, uninterruptedly, going back to the very manuscript which Rambam wrote in his own hand, which is referring to the books that Rambam wrote only 800 years ago. There's many different reprints of his books, etc. So this is considered sufficient proof even in the face of discrepancies or contradictions from one book of Rambam to another. Such contradictions do not demolish the above proof. Rather, efforts are made to reconcile them in the certainty that both have been written by the same author. Once we know that the Rambam wrote both of his books, or many of his books, even if one might think that there's contradictions between the different books, the minor contradictions that are found is not a reason to say that they're not written by the Rambam, because we know they're written by the Rambam because of the fact that they're reprinted from other versions that go all the way back to the Rambam's own handwriting. So the point is, that minor inconsistencies is not a proof that they're not written by Rambam. Rather, it's going to say efforts are made to reconcile them. Okay. So the same kind of proof substantiates any historic past, which we ourselves have not witnessed, and all normal people accept them without question, except those who, for some reason, are interested in falsification. Meaning, if someone refuses to believe any historical event, no matter how much evidence there is, there's nothing that can be said to them. But we're talking about all normal people who accept basic historical events without question once we know events have happened. So, in many cases, the authenticity of an historic event is based on the evidence of a limited group of people, where there is room to suspect that the witnesses were perhaps not quite disinterested. This is in most cases, even though we can assume the witnesses perhaps had reasons for lying, but nevertheless, because there is nothing to compel us to be suspicious, and especially if we can check the evidence and counter-check it, it is accepted as a fact. This is talked about in other cases, in the general world. Even if someone doesn't completely trust the witnesses, the fact that there are witnesses and the fact that we can check the evidence and double-check it, etc., that is enough as a fact. That is enough proof to establish an historic event in general as a fact. This is talking about historic events, because other scientific proofs can be repeated, but historic events can never be repeated. But saying when you have basic witnesses and enough basic evidence, that's enough to establish it as a fact in the context of historic events. So from the above point of view, any doubts you may have about the authenticity of the Jewish tradition should be quickly dispelled. Millions of Jews have always known and still know that God, G-D, as you can, is the author of the Torah, Shebiktav, the written Torah, and the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral tradition, which he gave to his people, Israel, not only to study, but to observe in practice in daily life. Meaning the Torah is not just a book that people have been studying. People have been practicing the laws of the Torah for thousands of years. So the Almighty made it a condition of the existence and welfare of our people as a whole, and of the true happiness of every individual member of our nation. Meaning the fact that we still exist is because of the Torah. How else do the Jewish people exist still today? So anyway, how do these millions of individuals know, and how did they know in the past, that the Torah is true? Simply because they have it on the evidence of their fathers, millions of Jews that preceded them, and these in turn from their fathers, and so on, uninterruptedly, back to the millions of Jews, if we include women and children, and those above and below the age range of the 600,000 male adults, who witnessed the divine revelation at Sinai. Meaning at Mount Sinai, thousands of years ago, there was millions of people who saw Hashem become revealed directly through the fire, smoke, and the blast of the ram's horn, and the voice emanating from all six directions. This was in front of millions of people, 600 adult males plus all the other people. Millions of people directly saw it, and they passed this down uninterruptedly to their millions of descendants. Through all these generations, the very same content has been traditionally handed down, meaning it hasn't been changed. There's no change in the Torah. It's the same Torah throughout all these thousands of years, not by a single group, meaning the Jewish people are not, deep down everything's a single group, but saying the Jewish people are not just a single group. The Jewish people are such a variety of different people. There's no reason to assume that they all got together to make it up, but by people of many millions. Many millions is not just some single group who are just making things up, not by a single group. The Jewish people as a whole, deep down, everything is a single group. It's saying the Jewish people are not just a single group. There are many millions of people with such a diversity of different mentalities. Why would they get together to make something up if they have so many different mentalities, walks of life, interests, under the most varying circumstances? If the circumstances were exactly the same, then maybe one would think that it wouldn't be changed. But if the circumstances throughout thousands of years change all the time, and throughout all this time, the same Torah is being passed down through all these different kinds of people of different mentalities, different walks of life and interests, and the circumstances themselves are changing all the time, plus the places and times, etc., have all been changing. Yet it's the same exact Torah that's been passed down throughout all this time. Such evidence cannot be disputed. It is difficult in the course of a letter to elaborate, but I am sure that even the brief above analysis should dispel any of your doubts, if indeed you had any serious doubts, because most people think they have doubts, but they don't actually really have doubts. As to the authenticity of our tradition, I trust you will, from now on, not permit anything to weaken your observance of the mitzvahs, whose very observance of itself illuminates the mind and soul more than any philosophical book can ever do. And this is Rebbe saying that he shall be glad to hear good news from you and wish you success with blessing. And then that was his signature after that.